Emmerdale star Natalie J. Robb has teased next week's 12-and-a-half-minute scene between her character Moira Dingle and Jeff Hordley's Cain. The scene in question will see Cain confiding in his wife before telling the rest of the family about his cancer diagnosis. After advice from Dr. Liam Kavanagh, Cain will be seen updating Moira on what he's been going through while she's been behind bars and the true aggressive nature of his illness. Reeling at the revelation, she'll then urge him to break the news to the likes of Kyle, Isaac, and the rest of the Dingle clan. Asked about the emotional moment, Robb said, "Well, that particular scene where he tells me, that was a 12-and-a-half-minute scene. We did it back to front. We didn't forget our lines or anything, we just did it. It was written very well by a writer called Adam Sales, who's kind of come up through the ranks. He knows the characters, and you can tell because sometimes when you're faced with a scene that's that long, you're a bit daunted because if it's not written particularly well for the characters, it's really difficult to learn. In this case, you just had to read a few more times. I could already hear Cain's voice, Jeff's voice, and it went in." She added, "You can feel the emotion and stuff when it's right, you can. Sometimes when you have to pick something up, or it's on a different shot or whatever, you've got to try and get it back. But Tim, the director, is very good. He says he likes to do the close-ups first, so you've got all your emotion in there, which is what he did. I thought Jeff was particularly great in that scene." Pressed on Moira's headspace, she said, "I think she's just in shock. She feels like her whole world is falling apart. He's her rock as much as she is to him, and it's all about the family. She just thinks, what about the boys? What are we going to do?" Earlier this year, Hordley said, "Working with someone like Natalie, we really bounce off each other. We did our work. We did lots of Zoom or FaceTime calls with each other prior to coming to the floor with it, so we could just then let it go, and try, and get the best take in. I hope the audience stick with this scene because it's a really important scene within this particular story, and I think it's a great Cain and Moira scene. Fingers crossed for that one, but it was a challenge and a joy to do." The farmhouse felt strangely empty. The wind rattled the old windows, carrying the distant sounds of sheep in the fields and the faint hum of the village beyond the hills. The Dingle home had always been full of life, arguments, laughter, and chaos, but tonight there was a stillness that felt almost unnatural. Cain stood by the kitchen table, staring at nothing in particular. His hands rested against the wood, knuckles pale, as he pressed them down. Across the room, Moira Dingle watched him carefully. She had only been back for a short time, after weeks away dealing with her own problems, and something about Cain immediately felt wrong. He looked thinner, paler. The usual fire in his eyes seemed dulled, replaced by something heavier. Fear. Moira knew Cain better than anyone. She knew when he was angry. She knew when he was lying. And right now, she knew he was hiding something. "Cain," she said quietly. He didn't answer. Instead, he inhaled slowly and stared out the window toward the dark fields. "Cain." This time her voice was firmer. He turned slightly, but his eyes didn't meet hers. "What?" he muttered. Moira folded her arms. "You've been acting strange since I got back." "Have not." "Don't lie to me." That finally made him look at her. And in that moment she knew. Something terrible was coming. The truth he couldn't hide. Cain sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Moira watched him, her heart beginning to race. The silence stretched between them like a tightening rope. "What is it?" she asked. Cain rubbed his face slowly. "You remember when I said I'd been seeing Dr. Liam Kavanagh?" Moira nodded. "You said it was nothing serious." "Yeah." Another pause. Cain's voice dropped. "I lied." The words landed like stones. Moira felt her stomach twist. "What do you mean you lied?" Cain leaned back, staring at the ceiling as though the answer might be written there. "They ran tests," he said quietly. Moira's breathing grew shallow. "And—" he swallowed. "And it's not good." The room seemed to shrink around them. Moira stepped forward slowly. "Cain, what are you saying?" Finally, he forced the words out. "I've got cancer." The world stopping. For a moment, Moira didn't react. Her mind refused to process the sentence. Cancer. Not Cain. Not the man who had survived everything life had thrown at him. She shook her head slowly. "No," she whispered. Cain looked away. "It's aggressive," he continued. "They caught it, but it's bad." Moira's hands trembled. "How long have you known?" "Few weeks." "Few weeks." Her voice cracked. "And you didn't tell me." Cain's expression hardened, though pain flickered beneath it. "You were dealing with enough." "That's not your decision to make." Her voice echoed around the kitchen. Outside, the wind howled against the farmhouse walls. Moira paced across the room, trying to catch her breath. This can't be real. Cain watched her silently. Finally, she stopped in front of him. What did Liam say? Cain hesitated. He said we start treatment soon. And he didn't make promises. Moira closed her eyes. Her whole world suddenly felt like it was collapsing. The fear beneath the strength. Moira sat opposite him, her hands shaking. Cain had always been her rock. Through every disaster, every heartbreak, he had been the one person she could rely on. Now that rock was crumbling. What about the boys? She whispered. Cain's jaw tightened. That's the problem. She looked at him. Kyle. Isaac, they deserve to know. Cain shook his head immediately. No, you can't keep this from them. I'm not scaring them. You think they won't notice something's wrong? He slammed his hand lightly against the table. I said no. The anger faded as quickly as it appeared. He rubbed his face again. I just need time. Moira stared at him. For the first time since she'd known him, Cain Dingle looked scared. Not angry, not defiant, just scared. The heart of the Dingle family. Moira reached across the table and took his hand. Cain rarely let people see his vulnerability. But tonight the walls around him were cracking. You're not alone, she said softly. He didn't respond. We'll face this together. Cain looked at her. And if I lose? You won't. You don't know that. Moira squeezed his hand harder. I know you, she said firmly. And I know you don't give up. Cain gave a faint, humorless smile. First time for everything. Moira leaned forward. You've survived worse than this. He shook his head. This isn't some fight I can punch my way out of. No, she said quietly. But you won't fight it alone. The decision that had to be made. Hours passed as they talked. About treatments. About fears. About everything Cain had been holding inside. Eventually, Moira stood and looked toward the hallway. You have to tell them. Cain stared at the floor. The whole family deserves to know. He sighed. You know what the Dingles are like. They'll support you. They'll panic. Maybe, she admitted, but they'll be there. Cain considered her words. The Dingle family had always been chaotic, loud, and overwhelming, but they were loyal. Fiercely loyal. Moira stepped closer. You've spent your whole life protecting everyone else. He didn't argue. Now it's their turn to protect you. Cain exhaled slowly. Then he nodded. All right. A family united. The next evening, the Dingle house was full. Voices echoed through the rooms as relatives gathered, confused about why Cain had called everyone together. Moira stood beside him as he faced the family. For once, Cain Dingle looked nervous. He cleared his throat. I need to tell you something. The chatter stopped instantly. Everyone turned to look at him. Cain glanced briefly at Moira, then back at the family. His voice was steady, but heavy. I've been diagnosed with cancer. Gasps filled the room. Shock rippled through the Dingles like a wave. Moira felt Cain's hand tighten around hers. For the first time in years, the strongest man in the village looked vulnerable. But he wasn't alone. Not anymore. Hope in the darkness. Later that night, the house was quiet again. Cain stood outside beneath the cold Yorkshire sky. Moira joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist. They stood together, looking out over the fields. You all right? She asked softly. Cain nodded slowly. Yeah. It wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough. For the first time since hearing the diagnosis, the weight on his shoulders felt slightly lighter. Because the truth was finally out. And whatever came next,